Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's story. In this episode, Day makes a surprising decision. He doesn't head south as planned. Instead, he brings Huyen and little Maya on an unforgettable trip to Sapa, where snow quietly blankets the mountains and slows everything down. What begins as a simple getaway soon turns into a meaningful journey filled with laughter, reflection, and emotions neither of them expected. From Maya's first time touching snow to the unspoken moments between Day and Huyen, this trip changes more than just their surroundings. Stay with us until the end to see how this snowy escape becomes a turning point they'll never forget. And don't forget to subscribe to help us reach 500 subscribers. Your support means the world to us. The bus climbed steadily along the winding mountain road, its engine humming low, as if afraid to disturb the quiet of the highlands. Outside the window, the scenery changed little by little. Green valleys fading into darker forests, then into hills where the colors softened under a pale white layer. Snow had begun to fall again, light but persistent, drifting down like feathers. Dee sat near the back of the bus, one arm wrapped protectively around Maya, while the other rested on the seat in front of him. Maya pressed her face against the cold glass, eyes wide with wonder. "Uncle why is the sky dropping white flowers?" Dee chuckled, lowering his voice so as not to wake the sleeping passengers nearby. "They're not flowers? That's snow. It only falls in places like this." "Can I touch it?" she asked immediately. "Soon," he replied, "when we arrive." Across the aisle, Huyen watched them quietly. She had wrapped her scarf tightly, the cold slipping into her bones in a way she wasn't used to. Just a few days ago, her life had followed the same narrow routine. Work, home, worry, repeat. When Dee suddenly told her he wasn't going south anymore, that he wanted to take her and Maya to Sapa instead, she had been stunned. There was no long explanation, no dramatic speech. Just a simple decision, spoken calmly. At first, she thought he was joking. Now, as the bus climbed higher into the mountains and snow fell thicker outside, she realized he meant every word. The bus finally pulled into Sapa town in the late afternoon. The moment the doors opened, a rush of icy air swept inside, carrying with it the clean, sharp scent of snow. Maya squealed in excitement, bouncing in her seat. "It's cold! Uncle Day! It's really cold!" Day laughed as he helped her down the steps, steadying her small body on the slippery ground. Snowflakes landed on her hat and eyelashes, melting almost instantly. She reached out clumsily, trying to catch them. "They disappear," she exclaimed. "That's because your hands are warm," Day explained patiently. Huyen stepped down behind them, her boots sinking slightly into the snow. She paused for a moment, looking around. Wooden houses lined the road, their roofs dusted white. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and warm, yellow lights glowed softly through frosted windows. It felt like stepping into another world. Quiet, slow, untouched by the noise she had grown used to. They walked carefully to a small homestay tucked away on a slope. The owner greeted them with a welcoming smile and ushered them inside, where the warmth hit them instantly. A fire crackled in the corner, and the smell of burning wood filled the room. Maya rubbed her hands together, then hurried toward the fire before Dee gently pulled her back. "Not too close," he warned. The owner poured hot tea into simple ceramic cups. Huyen wrapped her hands around one, sighing softly as the heat seeped into her fingers. Maya took a cautious sip, then nodded seriously. This is good. That night, snow fell heavier. From the window, Sapa looked like a quiet painting. Streetlights glowing through curtains of white. The sound of the wind softened by snow. Maya sat on the bed, still wearing her hat, refusing to take it off. If I sleep, will the snow go away? She asked anxiously. Dee shook his head. It'll still be here tomorrow, probably even more. Satisfied, she finally lay down, falling asleep quickly after a long day of excitement. Huyen watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, her expression easing in a way Day hadn't seen in a long time. Thank you, she said softly, not looking up. Day leaned against the wall. You already said that. I mean it, Huyen replied. She's happy. I haven't seen her like this in a long while. Dee glanced at the window, where snow continued to fall steadily. Kids remember moments like this, he said. I still remember the first time I saw snow. It makes you forget other things, even if just for a bit. Huyen nodded, understanding more than he realized. Morning arrived quietly. When Dee opened the door, the world outside was blanketed in thick, untouched snow. The road, the trees, even the steps leading down the hill were completely white. Maya gasped loudly, then ran toward the door before Dee could stop her. Slow down, he laughed. She stepped outside, her boots crunching softly. After 2 careful steps, she slipped and landed on her bottom, eyes wide in shock. A second later, she burst into laughter. I fell, Uncle Dee. I fell, but it doesn't hurt. Dee rushed over, kneeling beside her. Snow is soft, but you still need to be careful. Soon, the small yard was filled with Maya's laughter. She tried to make snowballs, though most of them crumbled in her hands. Dee showed her how to pack the snow tighter, his patience endless. Huyen stood nearby, watching, occasionally taking photos with her phone. She realized she was smiling without forcing it. They walked through town later that morning, moving slowly on the slippery roads. Vendors sold hot corn, roasted chestnuts, and steaming cups of tea. Dee bought snacks, handing them out like small treasures. Maya's cheeks turned red from the cold, but she refused to complain. It's cold, but I like it, she declared proudly. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the valley. Below them, terraced fields stretched out, now hidden under snow and clouds. The world felt quiet, almost unreal. Maya stood between Dee and Huyen, holding both their hands tightly. It's so big, she whispered. Dee looked out over the valley, then down at Maya. In that moment, he felt something settle inside him. This trip wasn't planned. It wasn't logical. But standing there, with snow falling gently around them, he knew it was right. That afternoon, they returned to the homestay, tired and cold. Maya fell asleep almost immediately, curled up under a thick blanket. Huyen adjusted it carefully, then sat beside her for a long time. She hasn't slept this peacefully in months, Huyen said quietly. Day nodded. Maybe the snow is working its magic. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and steady. Inside, the fire burned low. For once, Day wasn't thinking about what came next. He was here, in this quiet moment. And that felt enough. For now. The night in Sapa grew colder than any of them expected. Wind howled softly outside the wooden walls, carrying snow that tapped against the windows like tiny fingers. Day woke briefly to add more wood to the fire, careful not to make noise. Maya slept, curled into herself, her cheeks pink, breathing slow and even. Huyen lay on the other side of the room, eyes open, listening to the sound of the flames. She hadn't slept well in a long time, not because of noise or discomfort, but because her mind rarely allowed rest. Yet here, surrounded by mountains and snow, her thoughts drifted differently. Instead of worries about tomorrow's expenses or unfinished work, she thought about Maya's laughter earlier that day, about how light her daughter had looked running through the snow. And inevitably, her thoughts returned to Dee. When morning came, the snow hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown thicker. The steps outside were nearly buried, and the air felt sharper, cleaner. Day stepped out first, testing the ground, then called back inside. It's still snowing, and it looks like it plans to stay. Maya popped up instantly, her sleepiness gone. Can we go out again? Huyen hesitated. It's very cold today. I'll be careful, Maya promised quickly, already pulling on her jacket. They spent the morning visiting a small village not far from town. The road was quiet, almost empty, and the snow muffled every sound. Wooden houses stood close together, smoke rising from their chimneys. Locals moved slowly, wrapped in thick coats, some smiling warmly as Maya waved at them with both hands. Dee bought 3 wool hats from a roadside stall. One for Maya, one for Huyen, one for himself. Maya insisted they all wear them immediately. Now we match, she said proudly. As they walked, Dee noticed how Huyen moved differently here. Her shoulders seemed less tense, her steps lighter. She stopped often, looking around as if trying to memorize everything. The way snow clung to tree branches, the distant outline of mountains disappearing into clouds. At a small cafe overlooking the valley, they stopped to warm up. The windows were fogged, and the air inside smelled of coffee and firewood. Maya sat between them, swinging her legs. Uncle Dee, she asked suddenly, will the snow be gone when we go home? Probably, Day replied honestly. She thought about this for a moment. Then I want to remember it. Huyen looked at her. Remember how? Maya pointed at her head. Here, and then at her chest. And here. Huyen felt something tighten gently inside her. That afternoon, the snowstorm grew heavier. The owner of the homestay advised them to stay in, warning that the roads could become dangerous. Dee agreed without hesitation. They spent the rest of the day indoors, sitting close to the fire. Maya drew pictures with colored pencils, snow-covered houses, mountains, and 3 stick figures holding hands. This is us, she explained, handing the drawing to Dee. He smiled, folding it carefully. I'll keep it. As evening fell, the power flickered once, then stabilized. Outside, the wind grew louder. Huyen watched the snow swirl beyond the window, feeling a strange mix of awe and unease. She had lived through storms before, but snow felt different, quiet, relentless, covering everything without warning. Are you scared? Dee asked, noticing her expression. She shook her head. No, just thinking. About how different life can look, depending on where you stand. Dee considered her words. Sometimes distance changes things, he said. Not just places, feelings too. She glanced at him but didn't respond. That night, the temperature dropped further. Day checked on Maya several times, adjusting her blanket, making sure she stayed warm. Huyen watched silently, her thoughts heavy. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you really decide to come here?" she asked. Day paused. The fire crackled softly between them. "I told you, I didn't want to go south anymore." "That's not an answer," Huyen said gently. He exhaled slowly. "Because running doesn't fix anything. And because I didn't want you to feel like you were alone." Huyen lowered her gaze. The words settled deeply. The next morning, the storm had passed. Snow lay thick and undisturbed, the sky pale but calm. Sapa felt hushed, as if holding its breath. Dee suggested a short walk nearby before the snow melted or roads reopened. They walked slowly, careful with each step. Maya grew quieter, taking everything in. At one point, she stopped and looked around. "It's so quiet," she whispered. "Yes," Day agreed. "Snow does that." They reached a small open area where the snow lay smooth and untouched. Maya hesitated, then lay down on her back, spreading her arms and legs. "I'm making a snow angel," she announced. Dee laughed. "That's called a snow angel." Huyen watched as Maya stood up, revealing the shape in the snow. For a moment, Huyen felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from something close to gratitude. As they turned back, Dee's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then answered quietly, stepping a few paces away. Huyen didn't listen, but she could tell from his posture that the call wasn't urgent. When he returned, she asked, "Everything okay?" "Yes," he said. "Just reminders from the outside world." She nodded. "It feels far away here. That's why I wanted to come," Dee replied. "Just for a little while." Back at the homestay, they packed slowly. Maya protested, clinging to her hat. "I don't want to leave yet." Dee knelt beside her. "The snow will always be here, and so will the memories," Huyen added softly. "We can come back someday." Maya considered this, then nodded reluctantly. As they boarded the bus out of Sapa, snow still clung to the trees and rooftops. Maya watched quietly this time, no longer pressing her face to the glass. "Uncle Dee," she said suddenly, "thank you for bringing us here." He smiled. "You're welcome." Huyen looked out at the fading white landscape, feeling something shift inside her. Not a solution, not a promise, but a beginning. The snow of Sapa had given them something rare. Space to breathe, to feel, to see each other clearly. And as the bus descended from the mountains, she knew one thing for certain. This trip had changed more than just their surroundings.